For more on this, let's go to Brandon Arnold, who is the Executive VP at the National Taxpayers Union. So, Brandon, overall, there's been some mixed reactions on tariffs. I know you were listening to our good friend Paul Teller in the last segment talking about, maybe some complications on that. What's your assessment?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. And please don't have me on after Paul Teller anymore. It's just going to make me look bad. But yeah.
He knows too much.
He does. I just texted him after the show. He's a great guy and great guest as always. I am no fan of tariffs. Listen, I don't think tariffs achieve their strategic goals. I don't think they tend to benefit people, especially lower income people, at all, whether we're talking about domestically or on the countries that we apply the tariffs against. It hurts both sides. Now, I know Trump is using these primarily as a negotiating tool, and obviously we have enormous problems, particularly at our southern border with drug cartels, the inflow of drugs, illegal immigration, and so forth. So if it's merely a negotiating tool, that may serve some positive ends here. But goes back to the old gambling analogy. I'm not a big gambler, but you never put money on the table that you're not prepared to lose. When you're engaged in these types of negotiations, you should never make a threat that you're not prepared to carry out. And in this case, if this threat was fully carried out in terms of tariffs on the Chinese tariffs, obviously, which already did take effect just today, as well as Mexico and Canada, which are paused for a month, you'd be looking at a tax increase on Americans of over $1 trillion. That'd be the largest tax increase since World War II. And where I'm from, tax increases do not generate growth. They do not create wealth. They do not make us a more free or prosperous nation. Quite the opposite. So that is my concern here, that these tariffs, if they ever were fully implemented, maybe they will be, maybe they won't, but they would hurt a lot of Americans. They'd hurt our manufacturing sector, our farmers, and they'd hurt everyday Americans who put Donald Trump in office largely to reduce prices because we've lived through 4 years of inflation disaster under Biden.
Yeah, and certainly I don't think any Americans want taxes to increase. In fact, we all, myself included, are hoping that the income tax significantly goes down. There's reform at the IRS. There's some other method of figuring out a lot of the bloated waste and spending, perhaps with Doge. So it seems like these are two competing interests here to impose tariffs that, as you've described it, tarifflation, right, which I think is an apt term. But then also Trump is promising to reduce income tax and give Americans more than has been taxed and more of their earned wealth. So how are these two competing interests going to coexist if this is just a negotiation tactic? Maybe it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think you framed it very, very nicely. And that is a lot of the work that he's doing on the tax front, on the regulatory front, reducing spending, the work of Doge and Elon Musk and others, that's all fantastic. And we're really supportive of the tax effort we were back in 2017 when we got the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act across the finish line. That was enormous. And we saw a tremendous amount of growth in our economy. Jobs were created. Inflation remained low. Wages went up. Critically important, wages went up. So people actually had more money in their pocket as well as lower taxes. All of those positive things happened, 2018, 2019, up until the onset of the pandemic. We need to get back to that point because so much of these tax cuts are expiring at the end of this year. So that's a critical portion of his agenda, as is the deregulatory stuff, making sure that we can actually build the infrastructure that our economy needs. We're not having, 10 years of environmental review to build a road or a pipeline or what have you. That's all nonsense. But yeah, if you combine all those positives with what could be, a tariff strategy that, according to the Tax Foundation, would kill 300,000 jobs domestically alone, you're kind of at odds with one another. And the fact is, when you just kind of look at the political landscape, we're dealing with incredibly narrow majorities in both the House and Senate, particularly the House, of course. And if Donald Trump imposes these tariffs and is left to lose political capital because people are seeing higher prices, and even while Trump's base will probably stay with him, a lot of people would get frustrated, maybe not be as supportive of Trump as they are, and that honeymoon period may come to an end. It's going to be a lot more difficult to get his priorities through Congress, through a tightly divided Congress, if Trump isn't able to call recalcitrant members and say, hey, I'm a popular president, I have this mandate, vote for this bill because we need it, our country needs it. He's going to lose some of that ability if he takes a hit politically with these big tariffs. That's what makes me worried.
And I'm speaking with Brandon Arnold, who is the Executive VP at the National Taxpayers Union. And what about the factor of returning a lot of our manufacturing here to America? And that was a huge emphasis in Trump's first term. Of course, the renegotiated NAFTA agreement that became the USMCA, and there were a lot of different trips talking about manufacturing being brought. I mean, I was with President Trump at the time on some of those trips in Michigan and other places. Is that potentially maybe in Trump's mind at least an offsetting factor for tariffs that would be an encouragement to just have our manufacturing done here, so then companies don't even have to deal with something like a tariff?
Yeah, I mean, I think tariffs can bring some manufacturing jobs back. I think the most powerful force to bringing manufacturing back, and incidentally, our manufacturing sector is pretty strong. We've downsized in terms of the workforce, which is unfortunate for a lot of communities, but we've increased efficiency due to technological upgrades, utilization of AI, and just other efficiencies that our output has increased. Our manufacturing sector is pretty strong. The best thing that we can do for manufacturing is to lower our tax burden, as we did in 2017, dropping that corporate rate all the way from 35 down to 21%, and then providing proper tax incentives for investing in this country, technical policy, but bonus depreciation and so forth, R&D incentives, so people are innovating here in this country. All of those things act like a magnet to grow manufacturing, to encourage investment, and that's exactly what happened in 2018 and 2019. Again, those provisions, some of them, with the exception of the corporate rate, are expiring. We need to get those back on the books. And then, there are literally billions of potential customers outside of the borders of the United States. We want manufacturing to be strong, not just so they can supply our citizens with low-cost, high-quality goods, but also so we can sell that stuff all over the world. And we've done that. We've exported billions and billions of dollars in technology and in IP and so forth. So we want to make sure we have access to those markets. And unfortunately, when you get into these tit-for-tat tariff wars, we're seeing this with China. We're getting threats from the EU, threats from China, threats from Mexico. We can close off opportunities to sell things, whether that's bourbon, guitars, agricultural products, you name it, that we make here in the United States. We want to have those markets open for us.
Yeah, all of that really makes sense. And so, if you're advising the Trump administration and, seeing all of these different factors at play, what do you think is the most important priority, or just something that, maybe the average listener can keep in mind as they're seeing all of these headlines? And I think there's a lot of faith and trust really that's been earned by Trump, especially in the last 2 weeks. But overall, I mean, he's maintained a 54% approval rating, which is phenomenal. And I think that's only going to increase as his second term continues. But what would be, kind of the main advice to the administration to kind of keep all of these things, all of these spinning plates at once, and keep this on track?
Yeah, I think the first thing is stating that the United States is open for business again. We saw the Biden administration raise taxes on our business community, regulate our business community, go after them with lawsuits from the FTC and other government agencies, the CFPB, all of these alphabet soup of agencies created a hostile environment for our American companies. We need to be supportive. We need to encourage foreign direct investment, making sure that other countries have the incentive to open up manufacturing plants here in the United States. And then we need to knock on doors across the country and say, hey, you need to be an open marketplace for American goods, and you need to give American goods and services an equal and level playing field in your country so that we can sell into the European Union, into Australia, into Asia, and what have you. And so we can bring some stuff into this country, too. The majority of things that we bring into this country are not consumer goods. They are raw materials and intermediate goods that our manufacturers use to turn into automobiles or airplanes or what have you. So we need to have that flow working, but we need to reestablish really the American leadership that we saw certainly under Reagan and previous Republican presidents, showing that we are the global leader and that we are going to set the rules for the road and that America is going to be first.
Yeah, and speaking of the raw materials and coming in, especially like auto parts and all that, that was a huge point of discussion during the whole USMCA negotiation and all of that. That Trump was requiring that actually American made would be a percentage of actual materials as well, not just the raw materials, and then it's assembled in the United States and they call it American made. Was any of that rolled back during the Biden administration, to your knowledge, that Trump is going to have to kind of reestablish, or where are we at with some of those wins from his first term?
Yeah, the USMCA wasn't rolled back as much, but what happened, one of the interesting things that happened during the Biden administration, the electric vehicles, the EV tax credit, which was supposed to be a domestic incentive, only apply, that $7,500 credit for EVs only apply to countries that met certain requirements, including having American components, sufficient American components. Biden completely eviscerated that, much to the chagrin of former Senator Joe Manchin, by saying, well, if you purchase a car, then all of those requirements are in place, including having a battery that doesn't come from China and so forth. But if you lease the car, then it doesn't matter. You can the parts can come from anywhere. We don't care. The lease completely doesn't end around all of these requirements. And what have we seen? The lease rate for EVs has absolutely skyrocketed. People are leasing EVs at a rate double what they were prior to this stupid law kicking in. And so people respond to government policies. It seems so obvious, yet government never gets it. So, yeah, if we're going to have rules of the road, then they need to be fair. They need to be even-handed. In the case of Mexico and Canada, when you're making a car, the car and certainly the parts can cross the border multiple times during the production. So each time they cross, they could be facing an additional tariff. That's how you could have this exponential increase in tariffs if these do kick in, which certainly makes me nervous, because the last thing people need is higher priced automobiles. If you purchase a car over the past 5 or so years, you realize that market is really out of whack and really tough on Americans.
Yeah, well said. I think the last thing that Americans need is higher priced anything right now. So really good word. Brendan, Arnold, thanks so much. We are already out of time, and I'd love doing more of a deep dive into some of these different policy segments with both you and Paul Teller. Really appreciate it. You can always reach me and my team, Jenna, at